The sports photography game is a nightmare on your shutters, on your data. My name is Griffin Riley, and I am a photographer. I also work in the film industry, in the locations department, drone piloting, and aerial cinematography. That weekend I took over 13,000 photos, and I think I kept 200. Astronomical failures, and that's a norm. There's one thing in particular that made you fall in love with this specific scene. Focus on that.
Videos like this are possible thanks to Digital Film Hub. Stick around to find out more about them later. So what was it that initially got you started in photography?
I guess I'll preface the first part by saying I'm unfortunately not cool enough to do the location scouting work yet in the industry, because it's a tough one that's plagued with a lot of the unions are a great thing, but it's hard to break into them sometimes. So I don't have the clout to do the scouting yet. I'm more so manage on the actual day that we're filming. But as for how I got into photography in general, it was I always like to joke that it's out of my vanity in a way, because in high school, I have two sisters, but one is 2 years older than me. Her name is Mackenzie. And every Friday she used to do something with her friends called Photo Friday. And that was just where, end of the school week, whenever the final bell rang, they would just do a photo shoot somewhere across campus, and with like different friend groups, like really trying to mix the groups and build a little community in the school. And me being her punk little brother who had no choice but to be attached to her hip, she always had me taking the photos for her. And at one point, like, I was miserable. I always used to be terrible at photography. But at one point I sat there and I thought to myself, well, so long as we're going to be at the same school together, she's always going to make me take these damn photos of her. So I might as well actually start trying to get good at it. And so then I was starting to get the angles and everything, and like get in and out, all that kind of stuff. And the first time someone complimented me on one of the photos I took, after being told by my family how terrible I was for years, that first compliment, I was like, oh, okay. And I just pursued it like an animal from there.
That sounds awesome. What are some techniques that you often like to employ?
So most recently I was watching a video on some photographer whose name I don't remember, unfortunately, but it was talking about how he's basically allergic to shooting horizons. I think it was a Japanese photographer, if I remember correctly. And that's been an interesting thing I've been playing with more when I do some more of my aerial work, or if I'm just at an elevated position when I'm going on my rock climbing trips and doing photography on the top of the mountain. I think it's an interesting exploration because, we are so used to just always seeing sky somewhere. But outside of that, I have plenty of methods that are all inspired from some of the greats or some of the ones that I find great in the more modern age. So Fred Herzog, I really liked his use of heavy contrasty lighting, and in a way how that kind of brings out the color. He was one of the first photographers to really utilize film, colored film in general. And so his approach to how he would like shoot all these still life subjects, usually street photography, with heavy contrast lighting. I like to exhibit that in the way I expose for my photos. There's a gentleman named Greg Berg. I learned from him because I used to be a massive fan of the rapper Logic, and Greg used to be the tour photographer for Logic. But he also does a bunch of architecture photography, and I always liked how he's based in New York, and he'd be shooting these buildings all day, and he shot him in a way where it looked like a never-ending escape of just concrete and glass, and he would do that by kind of like making the end, like the hard corner of one building, intersect with the corner of another, so it looks like it's just an intersecting, never-ending building. And that led me to search for patterns a lot more. And then this landscape photographer and YouTuber named Thomas Heaton, one thing he always talked about way back in the day when I found him was he basically said, like, if you're sitting there at this beautiful landscape that you found, our eyes, we love it. and we always like think to try to recreate what our eye sees. We always shoot with an incredibly wide angle, but the wide angle never looks as good as it does with your eyes when you're actually there on the day. And what he kind of stresses is the idea of there's one thing in particular that made you fall in love with this specific scene. Focus on that. So he would basically advocate for zooming in and isolating the one subject. So when I was in Yosemite a couple weeks ago, you come out of tunnel view and you see just the most beautiful valley that you've ever seen in your life, and it's just stunning. But the thing that catches basically everyone's eye, at least this day, was the waterfall. So I'm not shooting the valley, although I did get a couple shots of that, because how could you not? I'm also really trying to isolate the waterfall itself, because that was the thing that's catching the light and that everyone's really staring at, and that brings all of the beauty out of the scene. So in short, I combined like all of these techniques and so much more to try to make my own thing out of it. And for what it's worth, I've talked to that Greg Berg guy and his architecture style, and I've noticed that it's very similar to Barbara Crane, who he said was one of his old favorites as well. And I have one of her books over there, and I was like, oh, what a coincidence. Long answer, I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. So what gear are you shooting with these days?
Yeah, so primarily what I have is, I've always been a Sony guy. So right here I have, this is my A7 IV with the 70-200 2.8. This was like the first big boy lens that I got, because I was a photojournalist back in college and just after. And you really desperately need something like that to get your work done. What else do I got? I have a 7R4 as well. Admittedly, this is more camera than I need for most of my work and that most people need, because 61 megapixels with all that dynamic range is pretty excessive. But I came from shooting with an original Sony A7, which was crap is the only other way to say it. That thing is very long in the tooth. So once I left the sports photography world my senior year of college, and I needed a camera of my own because I didn't have the equipment pool anymore, I thought to myself, okay, do I want a camera that's really expensive and shoots 20 frames a second with the A9, or do I want one that has all the great same autofocus but is higher resolution, which I don't know. It kind of came down to, I was doing mostly landscape photography at the time, and having the dynamic range in that just really solidified it. And then lastly, I don't use it as much these days, but I have a Fujifilm X Pro 3. I had the X Pro 2, and they're incredibly fun cameras. It's a blast to use. I really like it because it's super small and pocketable, especially if I'm wearing a jacket around, which you don't need that often in California. But you have a jacket, you can just tuck it in there, and you have an incredibly capable, tiny, and stylish camera. And sometimes I'll take it in places where like, hey, no cameras allowed, but they see it and they think it's a film camera. So like, oh, it doesn't matter. And it helps that it literally has like the film slide here. But yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly capable, professional-ready camera, but I feel like sometimes there's a stigma in the world about like bigger is better, and needing to look the part. So that's why I never really use it on professional shoots. Plus, I do just find the Sony ones to be more capable for most of the work that I do. So day to day on a shoot, I have the Sonys, and for more fun personal usage these days, I have the Fuji. And then for drone stuff, I have a Mavic 3.
That's awesome. Whenever I speak to photographers, they're usually all about aesthetics because that's just what they do. It's for advertising, or, you know, it's where there are very strict quality or brand expectations and guidelines. And some of them speak completely from an artistic approach. Whereabouts would you say you sit on that spectrum?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that I used to do a lot of photojournalism, and in journalism in general, we really strive, although there are separate conversations to be had about the state of journalism in general, and its massive decline, but we at least should be completely objective, and I think it's easier to do that in photography than with your written words, because there's always going to be more of an interpretation there. And in photography, just to make that example of like subjectivity versus objectivity in photojournalism. I mean, there was one of those cases from there was an instance, I think it was Time magazine back in the 90s with the OJ trial. They had a photo of OJ Simpson on the cover, and they really darkened the hell out of it. And there was a lot of conversations about like the racism trying to make him look like a darker, blacker beast. And that's a very subjective interpretation of the editing. And nowadays, I basically my training was to just shoot it as it is and turn it in. Obviously, you'll do a little bit of your lighting adjustments. If there's a little bit too much shadow on the person's face, pull the shadow. I don't even like that much to be one of those people who uses masks on photos to, again, using the example of like if someone's face is slightly in a shadow, you keep the rest of the exposure the same, but you only highlight their face and bring the exposure there. I don't like doing that stuff too much either, but for the longest time, I was only going completely objective because that's just how I was trained and frankly how I think should be. But these days, I would say I'm getting a little bit more liberal with my color grading because I'm not working actively as a photojournalist anymore. So I'm able to have a lot more fun and edit them how I want to, and I'm treating it these days a lot more like art as opposed to documenting. And that's not to say that what photojournalists do isn't art. It's just to say that it's two dramatically different approaches. If you're some fine art, high concept photographer, like a David LaChapelle, for example, is the first one that came to mind, I think he would have a little bit harder of a time trying to transition into just doing massive like motorsports photography or something like that. And on that same note, motorsports photographer like Clive Mason, who shoots for, I think, Getty Images for Formula One, it would be a little weird for him probably transitioning to do the studio work that David LaChapelle does. So, I don't know. I feel like I answered your question in a way without answering it.
How much of a part does post-processing usually play in the photography that you do?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been doing a little bit more of it lately, but I still have the sensibility in the background to keep it like tame. It always really annoyed me when I was getting further along in my photographic career in college. My mom would always be basically giving me crap saying like, Griffin, you don't need to edit your photos. Like, that's ruining it. And she's thinking when I'm saying edit, she thinks that I'm going in and completely manipulating all the backgrounds and making something different. And it's just like, no, Mom, because when you're shooting raw photos, it's going to come out pretty much monotonous, not much life in the colors, no lighting or anything like that. I'm not out here trying to manipulate things and change my greens to blues with the hue slider. It's like literally just, it's just making this actually be fun to look at. And that's all. But I don't know, these days, I like to think, I mean, there's a concept of memory colors that I originally learned looking through the picture profiles on my Fujifilm, and it was basically talking about colors that look pretty much how you remember them to your eye. And I like to think that these days I'm kind of a editorial memory color where when I shot the IndyCar Long Beach Grand Prix a couple weeks ago, I keep the colors true to how they are, but I remember how hot I felt basically all that day. I mean, it didn't help that I have like 50 pounds of gear on my back. But that's all to say that like I keep the colors true to how they are, but maybe I'll like be playing with the warmness of the photo a little bit more to make it look, I don't know, to make you think of the heat. And that's just a basic idea of how a lot of, I mean, cinematographers think as well. I mean, if it's going to be in a cold place and you have like snow around, they're always going to tint things blue. And then the notorious Mexico filter when they turn everything orange in Breaking Bad whenever they're in Mexico or something. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of case by case though. Some pieces I think to myself, I'm going to go in for this for a long time and really meticulously change everything to execute a really gorgeous vision, and other times it's just, nope, this was good as it is, and I kind of just turn it in right there.
No, that's fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is to develop your own personal style, especially with how competitive the industry can be.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important because, yeah, everybody, like you said, it's so competitive. Everyone and their mom they not only can they get a camera, they already have a camera with their phones as is. So it really is about finding your own, whatever your own niche is in that case. Yeah, I mean, no, it's just, it's incredibly important because, yeah, there's literally no way that you're going to stick out unless you do have your own style. I mean, I remember in 2019, I was shooting the University of Arizona versus Arizona State football game. And my buddy and I, we were there for my university's athletics department. And we see this guy who works for Getty Images. And we're like, oh, let's go talk to him. Like, how cool would it be to work for Getty? Let's see what it's like for him. And we asked him, hey, man, how'd you get where you were? And he told us, first off, he was lucky where he was working for an old paper in San Diego that got purchased and therefore grandfathered in. And that's not to say it was all luck for him. Obviously, he was there as is, so we already had talent. But yeah, that was a lucky way. But another thing he told us is what you shouldn't do is move to one of the big cities like New York or Los Angeles. Because if you go there, everybody is going to be another young kid who wants to be a photographer in the cool place. And as a result, the companies are going to have a million people to choose from, and they're all going to be cutting each other's rates because everyone just wants some kind of job, and it's just going to be tough. So he recommended going to a smaller venue, maybe like a mid-sized city or something like that. That way you can kind of be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And I emphatically ignored him because I am a resident of California living in Los Angeles for 2 years. But it's still incredible advice, and I do think about it all the time with what I'm doing. Because, I mean, these days I'm becoming more in touch with my outdoors roots that I kind of grew up with in Arizona. And as a result, I'm doing a lot more off-roading trips where I'm getting deeper into the nature than most people ever would, and being able to take some photos there. And rock climbing has been a hobby of mine for the last like 2.5 years. And now, I mean, that Yosemite trip was a rock climbing trip, and I have my cameras strapped to my back with me as I'm scaling up the sides of the mountains, because when I'm on that mountain being held by a little 1/4 inch thick rope, that's the place that nobody else is going to go for a photo. And it makes it more unique as a result. Drones is kind of the same way, but drones are pretty attainable as well. It's still scarier than just picking up a normal camera, but it's a thing that sets you apart enough. And yeah, I mean, it's just basically to say, if you're another portrait photographer, okay, there's a million portrait photographers. But if you're living somewhere, again, here like Los Angeles, and you specialize in underwater portrait photography, that is a thing that not a lot of people would do. You won't get the most work, but because you are the authority on it, you can just cut blank checks. And, I mean, just charge basically what you want and probably make a damn good living doing it. So, specializations, it only helps you. And, yeah, it's something that I am actively trying to push for even more, because I was more of a generalist a couple years ago, and now I'm really trying to push and spread my wings into more of that outdoorsy adventure kind of stuff.
I'm just curious, with your photojournalism that you did, were there any guidelines in place or regulations that you had to adhere to when dealing with like sensitive subject matter?
Well, give me an example when you say sensitive subjects, so I better know how to answer.
Say politically. It may not even be with the intention of deception. I'm sure there was a guy a little while ago who got himself into some deep shit for painting people out just for the sake of printing a more pleasing image. I just wondered if there were any rigid guidelines that photographers have to adhere to, since problems like that happened in the past.
I'm fortunate enough that I never had to have a conversation like that, but if we look at my senior year when I was doing all my sports photography, or at least I was doing it the heaviest then, that was for a branch of our athletics department. And I mean, realistically, that's all marketing, that's all PR, to a degree propaganda, just within the realm of athletics. And as a result, if we're getting absolutely destroyed, I mean, you can look at any of your favorite teams' Twitter accounts and see, like, if your team got destroyed, their Twitter's been pretty much dead all day, and then maybe there'll be a tweet at the end of the day that said, I don't know if you're a soccer guy, but maybe they'll just like tweet like, oh, 3-0 them, and that's like all they say for the caption. There's like no energy and just the most boring graphic. And that's kind of normal. You don't want to celebrate your losses. That being said, as the photographer, I was never directed not to shoot that. That year, our football team was absolutely horrendous. We were good for a couple games, and then we lost for over like a year and a half straight from that point on. Like literally every single game. So there were a lot of photos that I was taking of our boys just being distraught, our coach looking just absolutely furious. I mean, I had so many of those photos because I look at it as important as documenting the history, good or bad as it is. And as minor as it is, it's weird to say that college sports is history, but that will always exist in a permanent record. You can look up all the results of every game that's gone back for like 50 years. So yeah, I would always go back and take those photos of people no matter how distraught they are. Obviously, you want to be empathetic as well. If you see the player just like sobbing and looking terrible, you don't want to get like right up on them. Always. Sometimes people do it. But yeah, this is all to say that I would always take the photos, but that's up to the editors to decide whether or not they use them. Because, yeah, working for a propaganda branch, essentially, of the athletics department, again, they don't want to post photos of when our coach looks like a sweaty, babbling mess on the basketball court or something.
Yeah, makes total sense, yeah. So I went to university, and one of the things that I felt was really lacking was the education in more of the business side. What advice do you have for more of the business side, maintaining relationships? Do you have any advice for how you go about networking as a photographer?
The first one I'm going to answer that question is the YouTuber Ted Forbes. His channel is called The Art of Photography. He put up a great video years ago that was, if I remember correctly, it was a Q&A, and one of his viewers was asking him, should I go to school for photography? And if I remember correctly, his stance was more or less no, but with a massive asterisk, where he was saying, at the end of the day, though, if you go to university, if you go to college, whatever, it's going to be, first off, it's kind of just a life-changing moment in general, where it'll be the only time in your life where everybody around you, and I mean, I went to a big state school of 50,000 people, so you're surrounded by 50,000 kids who are all the same age as you, all with the same stresses, on the same schedule, that go to the same places as you, and that is just such a artificial but beautiful utopia reality that you can't have ever in your life beforehand, and likely won't afterwards. Yeah, you might be a late in life college student, which, no judgment, like, get your education if you want to, like, it doesn't matter when you do it, but you will still be different than the 50,000 kids that are there if you're the one older guy there finally getting his degree. So it's not only was he saying it's like, it's just a beautiful time of your life because of that utopia-like society that's created, he was also saying that the other thing that you're going to get from it is just a network. And that is so incredibly important. Yeah, I mean, whether it's in the film industry on some of the stuff I've worked with, or some of the things I've worked on, the writers maybe like, this might be the first thing that they wrote, but they're there because the showrunner was one of their buds or their roommate in college or something. That is the nature of not just the film industry, but photography as well. I'm not going to kid and say that I'm the most successful photographer ever. I've done a lot, but I feel like I don't have the lifestyle to quite warrant the things that I've done. I think I said that backwards, but you probably know what I mean. But that being said, the main way that I get my checks out here is I work for a commercial studio that one of my buddies from college, we were in an improv troupe together. He's one of their production managers. And so as a result, he and all the other producers are hitting me up all day for drone work and commercial work. And that just goes to show, again, it's your network. If I didn't have them, I've gone to a bunch of other commercial studios saying, hey, this is what I do. And I've met with other directors and producers. But it doesn't necessarily materialize because they all want to work with the people that they know that they've worked with, or they know somebody who knows somebody. It's hard to break into any of those bubbles. But if you already have that one step in, that's kind of your way. So I would say that is overwhelmingly the main value to education. Because, yeah, I was mostly overwhelmingly a self-taught photographer. And by the time I took my photojournalism class, I was already, a junior in college. I knew everything, I say in big quotes, but it was such an introductory class that I didn't need any of that information. Yeah, I mean, people like me, I was already there. I just had to keep refining my style, but there wasn't necessarily anything that I learned from those professors. But I met other people there, and I hit it off with that professor who used to be one of the editors for Reuters. So yeah, you don't need school necessarily, but where else are you going to interact with an editor for Reuters magazine basically every day of your life, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. As I say, I went to uni rather reluctantly, I might add, but almost every job I've had since then has been a result of the network that I've built at university. At the same time, I guess it can depend on the person as well.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, no, it absolutely depends on the person. I mean, we have a family friend who he wants to become an actor, and once I moved out here, the film industry doesn't exist in Arizona and specifically Phoenix that I am like the resident cool dude in the in crowd for the people back home. So my phone's blown up like every day for the last 2 years for people being like, "What's it like, man?" But this one kid, a family friend, he was asking me one day saying like, "Hey, man, I want to be an actor. I want to be a model. Mom kind of wants me to go to college. Do you think I should go to college?" And I'm like, buddy, I am not the one to answer that question for you. I'm not going to tell you not to go to college. That's literally on you. I'm not going to lie and say that it's something that you don't need. Like if you're just trying to model, yeah, you could just be the pretty person walking the streets of LA and there's going to be a photographer like, I like you. And acting, I mean, there's so many people I know who were like theater, film, TV majors who, I mean, in general in the film industry, you can major in like directing, but that doesn't mean you're going to get hired as a director. That's just not how this works. It's just working at it and really grinding your teeth. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to go to school. Like, yeah, it's not necessarily needed, but you're going to meet all these professors who will know people and who will give you a pipeline to representation, agencies, showcases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which would be a lot harder to do independently. So, yeah.
100%, yeah. So what are your feelings on the rapid evolution of technology within the creative industry? Are you as terrified as a lot of people seem to be?
I'll say this. I am not worried about it as much as an artist, as much as I'm worried about it as a human. So yeah, I mean, I majored in journalism and political science, so a lot of what we would talk about is just the way, I mean, especially within the realm of journalism, we talked a lot about the fourth estate and the accountability of democracy, and then obviously the poli-sci and how you uphold democracy, ignoring any potential thoughts, political interpretations of American democracies and imperialisms, all that kind of stuff. But we talked a lot about that kind of stuff all day. And this is to say that, don't be mistaken, I think it's hilarious. My buddies and I, we send those deep fake like AI voice chats of like Donald Trump, Obama, Joe Biden playing video games all day and just like cursing each other out. We think that those are the funniest things in the world, and I'm so happy that AI exists just so I can laugh for 10 seconds a day. But at the same time, you do have to acknowledge that no, these voice models are getting really good at truly deceiving people, and I don't think that we have enough checks and balances at this stage in our life to completely annihilate the possibility of the reality of deepfakes and just something being completely AI generated. Now, Skynet technological tirade aside, I mean, I was listening to Petapixel's podcast today. They just did their first ever that came out this morning, and they talked about Photoshop's newest like AI editing thing where I mean, it's one of those things that sounds like where you can just kind of like circle a person and then they'll completely leave frame and it'll like intelligently fill that area and all that kind of stuff. That's not what I like, given the photojournalistic background. I'm like, no, that tree was there. I wish it wasn't, but that tree is there, and I frequently think to myself on site in a location, I'm like, damn, this photo would be so much cooler. Like, I can visualize the photo being cooler if I was just floating like 10 feet in the air and I'm pointing the camera down or something like that. So, like, I acknowledge the limitations of the shoot if something's in my way, but that's just how it was. So that's how I'm presenting it. So that's why I do disagree with those types of implementations to Photoshop. But as those guys were talking about, they're like, I mean, yeah, all the time when we were starting out, we would be shooting like back plates of a clear sky one day, knowing that one day I'm going to cut out that back plate and overlay it on a beautiful landscape photo I have to like manipulate it. So they're basically saying it's the same thing at the end of the day, just instead on Photoshop, now you can just type cloudy sky and it'll automatically change everything in the sky. So, I mean, it's possible for your workflow both your workflow and your style for it to be beneficial, but it's something that I don't see myself dipping my toes in, both because that's not how I like to do it. I think that turns more into digital manipulation than it does actual photography and editing. And because, frankly, even though I'm 25, I'm kind of an old geezer who doesn't like going into the technological world. So it's those three things.
Can you talk a little bit about how you like to use light and the visual impact that can have on your photos?
I think there are two... With regards to this question, I think that there are two types of photographers in the world. You have the idea of a natural light photographer, and some people do that just because they love to and they're really skillful at seeing the natural bouncing and contours of the light. And other people do it because they're too bad to learn how to use flashes and actual external light sources, you know? And I've always thought of myself as a natural light photographer, and I won't kid myself when I say that part of the reason I was that way when I was more in the infancy of my career is because I was too trash at thinking about what light actually does. I knew what made a good photo. I knew how to take a good photo, rather, but I never actively thought about lighting for the longest time. Nowadays, I am still overwhelmingly a natural light photographer because that's just how I prefer things. But I have grown to see the appreciation of external light sources in so many different ways. And maybe the reason I've grown into it more is because I've working in the film industry where you just have hundreds of guys who are just there, or not hundreds, but like 50 guys there just to move like one big light. And just the idea of a gaffer is just making things pretty and lit well. Maybe that's what's opened my eyes to it a little bit, but I mean, it's incredibly important. I mean, I can't understate it enough. And even then, I don't want to, this actually reminds me of something that you asked earlier about like the creating your own style, how I mentioned all the other photographers that that I take my influence from. I think that there's no real such thing as originality to a degree these days, so it's interpreting as many other influences and trying to make it your own from there. But even still, yeah, you'll see me shoot things. You'll see me shoot sports with that Herzogian lighting, so you're like, oh, that looks like how Herzog would shoot sports. The only reason I did that aside is because I don't think I have anything original to say about lighting. I mean, you think about the way Hitchcock would just have his silhouettes of himself in the door frame as he wakes up. Like, that will be an ominous look. Yeah, God, I wish I had more of a vocabulary about how cinematographers and still photographers light their stuff. But, I mean, it is incredibly important. I mean, like, having like a little bit of a catch light where you're able to see that reflection in somebody's eye might make the colors pop a little bit more. And you need to learn how to manipulate that more, where maybe you'll have a light on their opposite side, but it bounce on the front, so that way it'll hit the light, which will then catch their eye. Or sorry, it'll hit the bounce, which will catch their eye. It's small things like that which really can make your stuff stand out a little bit. Yeah, I feel like that was a horrible answer, and I apologize. But I'm mostly a natural light kind of guy. But, I mean, natural light, again, it's still important to know what the light does. I mean, I remember there was a day that I was doing a photo shoot. I was working as a photo assistant for a National Geographic photographer named Bill Hatcher, an incredibly lovely guy. Just absolute sweetheart, humble as can be, despite being one of the most accomplished men that I've ever met. And this was probably my junior year, and he was sitting there trying to tell me and like explain to me how light works, and I just wasn't getting anything, but I was too ashamed to act like I didn't, so I was just like blindly agreeing. But I remember what he was like trying to teach me this day is like, there's a point where there's a wall here and the sun's up over here, and this is a white wall, and so what he was doing is he was posing against that wall for me so I could see how the light is hitting this white wall and therefore acting as a massive diffused bounce for the subject who's standing adjacent to the wall. That's all using natural light, but you're thinking of it the same way a gaffer or a grip would in the film industry, with using all your bounces and fills and all that kind of stuff.
I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but just to clarify, could you name your sort of top 3 or say top 5 influences when it comes to the work that you do?
Yeah, number 1 is Fred Herzog by a metric mile. He's just incredible. I mean, there was a couple years ago I was just obsessed with all things street photography, and he is one of the OGs, and again, one of the OGs of color photography in general, because back in the day, people just weren't crazy about... they thought that color photography was a gimmick and that black and white is the only true art. But this guy showed him, was like, nah, color photography is a legitimate thing. So he kind of told them to just shut up and appreciate him. I'm sure in much kinder words. But yeah, I mean, there are other photographers like this guy that I followed on Instagram for years. His name is his handle is 6th Street Under. I think his name is Craig Whitehead. You can see in his street photography style, everything he does is both derivative of and very stylistically derived from Fred Herzog. So yeah, I mean, same use of color and a lot of heavy contrast, but just with the more artistic, abstract interpretation. Some of the things that I love most these days is I recently rekindled my love of redneck type activities, aka motorsports and racing. And so I follow a lot of great motorsports photographer. I mentioned, if I remember correctly, his name's Clive Mason. I think his handle is Clive J. Mason. Yeah, and he shoots for Getty Images, and every photo he takes, he's probably the best I've seen at doing the whole idea of like slow shutter speed, like panning with the cars as they go by. And there are just so many beautiful photos he has of, like, say, maybe the tunnel in Monaco, of like the Ferrari, it's gunning through the tunnel as it's bottoming out, and he's shooting with heavy contrast and panning, and because it's bottoming out, it's kicking out sparks, and the sparks just come out as like long exposure streaks, and you see so many just gorgeous elements where you're seeing the abstraction of just the waves of the aerodynamic elements of this car and the colors that they beautifully paint them, the sparks flying everywhere. It's just such gorgeous work. Yeah, that Thomas Heaton gentleman, he was great for teaching me the idea of just really zooming in and focusing on the one specific thing. And yeah, Greg Berg, he really helped to... Gregory Berg, yeah, his name on Instagram is gbergphoto. He really helped me to like try to find the patterns and the interesting angles for things. Although I don't do much architecture photography these days, it's something that really shaped the formative years of me as a photographer.
Where do you see yourself in like 5 or 10 years time, say? Like, where would you like to be?
Tao, I don't know where I see myself in a week. No, I mean, yeah, like I mentioned, motorsports, that's something that I've just fallen in love with. It was actually funny the way I, just for a quick side note, the way I fell in love with it is, I mean, I grew up around that kind of stuff. I went to races all the time when I was a kid, and I just like forgot about it for years once I was growing up and turning into my own man. But there was one day I was out getting mimosas with the friends back in college, and I see that qualifying for the Daytona 500's on, and immediately like my brain just shut off, and I'm staring at NASCAR for the duration of our brunch, and everyone's trying to talk to me. My buddies are trying to talk to me, ladies are trying to talk to me, and I'm just like watching cars just turn left for hours. And it just reminded me how much I loved motorsports. And so these days I've been watching it all the time, and there's a great race here in Los Angeles called the Long Beach Grand Prix, and I've been to that for 3 years straight and photographed it as a spectator each time. But this last time I met so many incredible people, including from the Arrow McLaren team, that I've been in talks with and who want to try to help me get credentials and jobs in the future. And that's something that I would love, because while I really enjoy the film industry and making films, film was never my passion. It's just something I really enjoyed. But things like motorsports, that's something that's always been so fundamental to who I am. And I mean, tangential to that, how I mentioned earlier, like adventure photography, I love rock climbing. And I love nature, so love doing landscape photography. That's why I'm climbing up the sides of mountains and just stopping midway through and turning around to take photos. And you can combine all of those, where back in February I went to an event called King of the Hammers, which is just a massive off-roading outdoors festival that lasts, I think it's 11 days. And it's just a race through a desert about 100, maybe 130 miles northeast of the city of Los Angeles. And yeah, that was just mind-blowing. Because yeah, you're in nature, you're surrounded by big, loud cars, and I'm able to do my photography. It's just an incredible thing. And on that note, there's actually a lovely photographer who I should mention as a more modern influence of mine, and I want to get his name right because I only like vaguely remember his but he's absolutely brilliant, and I just bought one of his books. His name is Ernesto, I believe it's pronounced Araiza, Araiza. That man is just so brilliant at doing this kind of outdoors rally racing photography, and he really specializes in just every photo you see of his, it's a truck going through and just the most beautiful massive dust clouds and rocks kicking everywhere, and it gives so much texture to every frame that he takes.
And that sounds wicked. Yeah. So a segment that we like to do here is where we take a look at some of your work, and you can explain some of the creative process that you went through to capture these images. So yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah, let's go for it. that photo, I'm fairly confident in saying to this date is still probably my favorite photo that I've ever taken. It might be the best photo I've ever taken. Yeah, I mean, there's a distinction between favorite and best, but this one, I love it so much. Yeah, so the story behind this photo is I was actually volunteering for the National Park Service in northern Arizona. Yeah, I got in touch with, I forget his official title, but like the director of 3 of those northern Arizona NPS sites. And yeah, I was just talking to him. I was like, hey, I mean, I'm a lovely photographer. I didn't say a lovely photographer. That sounds a little bit too cocky. But I'm like, hey, I'm a photographer. I love northern Arizona. I mean, I damn near grew up in it, doing all kinds of activities with my family, with my dad. I would love to shoot any of the sites. He's like, absolutely, I'll hook you up with a VIP pass, which is not very important person. It was like, actually, I don't remember it, but either way, it was like artist in the park. Yeah, it was like a special thing that they do for people, and so I technically had to sign I think it was like a 4 or 5 day lease on the house that I was staying in. I didn't have to pay anything, but that's just the procedures of how the federal government works, I guess. Where yeah, I had a 5 day lease for this place that they were lending me. And yeah, I was just going out shooting Walnut Canyon, Sunset Crater, and this photo here is from the Wupatki National Monument. And they are old Native American pueblos. I can't remember what tribe off the top of my head, which I feel terrible for not being able to, but Northern Arizona is covered in the Navajo and Hopi tribes, so it's probably one of them. And again, I feel terrible for not remembering that. But anyways, my affront to their society aside, I went out one night and I was like, no, I love me some astrophotography. This is a perfect place to do it because it's a dark sky city and there's such an interesting subject here already with the Pueblo. And I took a bunch of frames of it, originally using the rule of 400s, where you divide 400 by the focal length of your lens, and that's how long your shutter speed can be without getting star trails. So basically to have it look like your eyes would see it, where it's just a dot for the star. So I was doing a bunch of photos like that, which are beautiful in their own right, and I have a bunch of those on my website. But this one I'm like, no, I want to do star trails and really leave the shutter open for a long time and see how long we can get these trails going. And boy, it was so much more than I ever thought of. I mean, first off, this was during winter in an already freezing area of Arizona. And I was not, I mean, I grew up in the desert area of Arizona, so I don't have like any clothes meant for the cold. So I was freezing my rear end off. And yeah, not only that, like once it came time to like try to think about like, oh, there's got to be some equation. If there's an equation about how to make sure your stars stay as dots, there's got to be an equation to figure out how long you want the trails to be. And that sent me down a spiral where I basically had to teach myself trigonometry again on the spot, where it's like, okay, you leave it open for this amount of time, and then you're going to get this many arc minutes of rotation, and then blah, blah, blah. And I was talking about degrees and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, Christ, I didn't bring my TI-84 calculator out here with me. But yeah, so I was like rudimentally trying to remember my trigonometry. And then at one point I just went for it, and that resulted in this 16-minute photo that truly didn't need that much post-processing, believe it or not. Yeah, I mean, when you leave something open that long, the foreground that has absolutely no light on it, you'll start to see it because it was just, you had all the light in the world, and we shot it. What was the ISO at for that? I think I can check. The ISO looks like it was at 400. So you have so much dynamic range in that as a result. And yeah, the color being like kind of like an orangish tint to the to all of it. I mean, it was Pueblo rocks. So all of that is orange in terms of the structure itself. it looks almost identical to that. Obviously, the bushes would be a little bit greener, but you can't really get that color at 2 a.m. But as for the sky, you can notice around the horizon that there's a lot more orange, and that's because while it's a dark sky city, maybe 40 miles away, there is still small pockets of town and city. So you will see at least a little bit of the light pollution that comes out of that. And that kind of creates the orange cast that continues to reach up. And I would also like to point out, if it's not obvious, obviously you have like the center of the rotation of the stars on the right. And then further left, you have the super long trails. And in the middle, there's that blurry white mess. That is the Milky Way. So if I took that in I think the normal exposure should have been 16 seconds, you would see all the clouds of the gaseous clouds of the Milky Way. I mean, you could see it with your plain eyes. You don't need to do anything to see it. But when you're doing a 16-minute exposure, I mean, even the Milky Way turns incredibly blurry, and you start to see the motion in it.
That's awesome. Did you need to use NDs at all?
No, I didn't use NDs. I didn't even own an ND until a couple months ago, which is me getting into the more artistic world of photography. But no, that I just cranked my ISO as far down as I conceivably could. And I shot that wide open at 2.8. I probably should have stopped it down so I could get an even longer exposure. But I think the other ones I took were all at least ISO 6400, which is so many stops brighter. What would that be? That would be like maybe 6 stops brighter, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't do the math off the top of my head, but many stops. So yeah, by bringing that down, it was just then me trying to backtrack. Okay, if I brought it down X amount of stops, then how many stops can I raise this end? And yeah, just trying to do the math from there.
That's such a cool shot. Yeah. So the next photo is either at the beach or at the desert. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, that would be in the sand dunes in Yuma, Arizona, the Glamis sand dunes. Or I think these were technically Gordon Wells because Glamis is across the way. So I'll say this, even though this is in the top tier photo, it's one that I basically, or in my top tier folder rather, it's one that I kind of forgot about until I was looking through photos for this. I do really enjoy it, but I would not say this is one of my best by any means. But every element here, I think, is one to learn from and think about for up-and-coming photographers. Because, I mean, yeah, I could take a photo of the driver themselves every single time, but instead, by aiming it down, you're getting the interesting angle where you see the shadow that's painting the picture of who they are and what they're doing. And you're able to see the dirt a lot more as well. I think the way I would change this, if I were to take this today, would be I would bring the shutter speed down a lot more. Because what was this shot at? Just a second here. If it'll say... It looks like this was taken at, 1/80th of a second. So, I mean, I hadn't done much kind of motorsports, that kind of slow shutter speed panning at that point. That was literally the first weekend I had ever tried it. And frankly, this is not a photo that was conducive to that method. So, yeah, f-stop, f11, and shutter speed of 1/80th. I would not do that way these days. I would maybe keep the f-stop still somewhat tight, probably no higher than 5.6, and I would crank that shutter speed and make it really, really short. It's I would say at least 1/300th of a second. That way you can see a lot more definition in that cloud of dirt, and you wouldn't have as much blurring in that front wheel either. But anyways, regardless, I love looking at my old photographs and critiquing how it could have been better because, yeah, I think this photo has so many elements that could make it great that just didn't quite obey on my end as the shooter. It was just not the foresight or experience at the time to think about it. But, yeah, I still think it's a lovely photo nevertheless. And I would take this the exact same way. I would love the shadows and everything, but I would just bring that shutter speed down so you have a lot more frozen in place action. So this photo, this was from the this year's 2023 Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach. It's a long title, so. But anyways, yeah, this is my first time seeing an IMSA or just any form of an endurance race, which I've grown to love so much more than a lot of other motorsports. But yeah, I love the way these prototype cars look, whether it's in WEC or IMSA, and seeing them go by and seeing them in person for the first time, I was like, oh, these things are so cool. And this is my first weekend. I had just gotten my ND filter, so I was doing a lot of work with the ND on my 16-28 lens. Although this one was taken on my 70-200, I had a polarizer on it, which eliminates maybe one stop of light. And I had I was shooting at f9 and 1/40th of a second. So I was doing what I could. Oh, and I pulled the ISO to ISO 50, which is below my base ISO. So that was a pulled ISO. Yeah, so I was doing my best to make it as dark as I could so I could have that really slow shutter speed. And I was thinking to myself at this frame that a slow shutter speed isn't enough in this case, because I was already taking so many photos of the cars panning by. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try something different. Not only am I going to be panning, I'm also going to be cranking the zoom over. So I'm sitting there with my Sony camera, and I'm going through, and mind you, I'm shooting 10 frames a second the whole time. That weekend I took over 13,000 photos, and I think I kept 200. The sports photography game is a nightmare on your shutters, on your data. It's astronomical failures, and that's a norm, how many bad photos you get. Because yeah, if you're sitting there if something's going by at 200 miles an hour and you're making it so it's purposely blurry, it's hard to get the one that you like. So I'm sitting there panning with it the whole time, but as I'm panning, again, cranking the zoom, which now that gives you a rotation as well. So you need to fight your camera as you're turning it and keep everything in frame and pan at the same relative rate as it. And this was one of the better ones that I think got a really good effect, because you do the panning to get the sense of speed. And that's why you have the crowd that's so blurry on the bottom left of the image. But doing that zoom in as well, I feel like it looks like it is kind of coming at you as well. So, I mean, yeah, you can do a zoom in photo on a static subject as well with the long exposure. But doing it with the panning, just makes so many more elements that make it so much harder to get. But when you get one, I think it's cooler than some of the other panning shots I got, because it's just, yeah, it's just a tough get. That's the only way to describe it. So, same race. This is after the, I think this was after qualifying. I don't remember the exact schedule, but regardless, there's a series called Stadium Super Trucks, and it is just, I think it's probably the most American thing that exists, minus our military. But yeah, I mean, it's literally massive truck that's racing at, like, I think they top out at maybe either 120 or 140. And then in the middle of the track, they just throw in actual ramps to jump. And you're, like, required to hit the jumps as well. Unless maybe somebody, like, crashes on it or lands poorly, then obviously you don't want to land on top of them. But otherwise, like, no. You are hitting this jump every single time. And it's probably the coolest spectator event to be at, period. But then seeing these things fly over, I'm like, okay, I'm not in a position, I wasn't in an area of the track where I could get a cool photo from, like, above to show it panning. I am standing in the crowd and towards the back of it, so I can't shoot it, like, at ground level. So I'm like, how do I do this? I'm like, well, the truck's in the damn air, so point my camera up. And again, it was a lot of the trial and error of trying to do the panning motion. And yeah, I really liked the idea of this photo, because it is so just unnatural to see anything like that in the air. And then by having everything else so dramatically blurry, it conveys the speed as well. So is it weird seeing a truck in the air? Yeah. Is it weird seeing it so damn fast as well? Very, very, very strange. So I like it for that element. And this was so perfectly panned, because you can read everything on that side of the truck without any issues. Like, it is in tack sharp focus. And I love how just the crowd turns into a beautiful blurry mosaic of eccentric colors. I'm just incredibly fond of this one. One of the better ones that I got from that weekend, I would say. Oh, wow. Damn. I didn't realize I gave you so many of my motorsports ones, but exact same thing, shot in the same area. Just this one I shot it on the 16 to 28 lens, I believe, as opposed to the 70 to 200. And yeah, I mean, literally all of it, same exact story. That was shot on the 16 to 28, I believe. Same story. Just this one is wider, and I held the camera up so you have a better idea of the space and you can see how high it is. I would say I like the other one better, but I think that there's a purpose by having both the wide angle perspective and the telephoto perspective. But yeah, 100% same technique, same position. Yeah. So without a doubt, this one, it's a lot harder to tell what the hell's going on in it. And it's because it's just... So this is that off-roading festival that I mentioned I went to, called King of the Hammers. And you are in the middle of the desert. And you aren't in... So at this event, you are in the middle of a valley called Johnson Valley, in the Means Dry Lake. And, I mean, normally it's just a desert, but for these 2 weeks, literally 80,000 people are there. And so the camp area and the stage and everything, that's obviously going to be really well lit. But as soon as you leave, like, the proper event area, it's just outdoors and wilderness. So, yeah, obviously there aren't going to be street lights on top of a mountain or anything. So this photo here, it was taken on the Chocolate Thunder Trail, which is one of the more notorious ones that, I mean, those boulders that you can see like towards the bottom of the frame, those are the size of me, and I'm 6'2". And you have these guys in these modified vehicles that are sitting there trying to climb them, some very slowly, other people are trying to just really get the giddy up and get up there at like 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, which going like straight up on a boulder like that is damn terrifying. So I think it's interesting, this photo, because when you take this at, it said this was taken at 10:49 a.m. in the middle of the desert. I mean, you have nothing that's lighting it, and there's no amount of strobes in the world that I think you could set up to properly light this scene. It's just such an incredibly hard scene to shoot in general. So I was thinking to myself, how do I make an even half respectable photo out of this? And it's like, well, try to play with the contrast. No matter what, I'm never going to see any of the details in the far right of the photo, in those boulders or anything, because of how dark everything is. I can pull those shadows all day, but it's just going to be a purple noisy mess at that point. And even then, there's nothing over there worth seeing, so why try to expose for it? Clearly, the thing worth seeing is the cars, so I'll expose pretty well for the cars, and just enough that you can see that there are people just feet around them, and not a few people, like a crowd of maybe 2,000 people was surrounding this entire trail, just watching these guys break their $500,000 trucks. Well, I mean, we watched a wheel snap off, and he was on his side, but then he just did donuts on top of one of the boulders when we were out there. Just hilarious nonsense. But yeah, while I won't say this is probably like my best composition, I selected it for you because, again, it's just trying to think, how do you make this photo respectable? And yeah, I wanted to show the crowds that are here, and I wanted to show the cars, and it's dark out, so how do you balance the two of them? It's like, embrace the darkness and only see, because I mean, your eyes are only going to see those people in the headlights anyways, so why try to shoot and have the rest of it exposed, you know? Yeah, I hope that made sense. Yeah, so this first one, you're looking at the one of the two cars, correct? And the gentleman who's kneeling before one of them? Yeah. So this one, I I think I have better photos from this angle, but this one I have such a fondness for because the color grading that I did on it, paired with the fact that the photo in front is actually the same BMW in the previous photo we talked about in the last folder. I like that with the color grading and the fact that it is just out of focus. You can see all of the heat pouring off of the top of its exhaust valves, and that's why you have just like the murky effect. I mean, when you see the heat on the horizon, that's making it look like it's waving. It's that same effect, but I feel like in this case, on account of the color grading, it almost makes it look... I feel like it almost looks like an oil painting or something. And that's why I have a fondness of it. And that's just a happy accident. I would have deleted this photo if not for the fact that you can see the heat waves coming off of it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, this is the Long Beach Grand Prix, and this is just before the long back straight on, I think, turns 8 to 9. So this would be after like turns 6 and 7, which, yeah, that's how numbers work. But yeah, I have so many great photos that show the cars going up because they come out of a turn. They come out of a sharp, like 90-degree left-hander. So they're hugging the wall closest to where this gentleman is before they drop back down to the left and hit another 90-degree right to hit the back straight. And so I have so many cool photos. And you can see the road also bows upwards. It's like a very tiny hill. I have so many cool photos that you can see the layers of where people are on track regards to left and right and where they are in elevation. But I think the reason this is unique is because of, again, all of the just vapor and heat that you see pouring out of the back of that BMW prototype. This, I think, is just this is just a color play, and that's all that this is. This is me treating my camera more as a paintbrush than I am treating it as a photographer or photojournalist. This is me standing in the same spot where I took the 2 photos of the trucks, but in this one, I've thought to myself, so many people here are wearing so many eccentric colors because, I mean, the Long Beach Grand Prix, it definitely has a lot of like 80s aesthetic in all of its merchandise and everything. It's a lot of neons and oranges. And so I'm like, all these people have just wild, eccentric outfits on. I don't care about the people themselves. I like the color. So I kept the slow shutter speed technique, aimed it at the people, and I just did the panning shots on them. So that, I mean, it blurs all of the detail of the people because, again, they weren't what mattered to me, although I'm sure they're all beautiful people. It was the colors that mattered. So yeah, treated my camera as a paintbrush in that regard. I cranked the ND filter to 8 stops, and I just kept shooting until I found one that I thought was cool enough to really convey the sea of very abstract people and the rainbow that is their clothing. Thank you. Yeah, this one I love so much as well. So this is from King of the Hammers as well, and this is the opposite, more or less the opposite view of that nighttime shot at Chocolate Thunder. So where this gentleman turned left in his Jeep there, which, yeah, that is a Frankenstein of a Jeep that has maybe like $100,000 put into it. Where this gentleman turned left, if he turned right, he would be climbing that massive, the massive path that you saw in the previous image. But you can see here how many people there are on standby, and this is at a random point in the day where this isn't even the race. This is just spectators having fun on the track that the races would eventually be on. So that's all to say that this is the crowd when it's light. And you see so many people on the right going all the way down to the left where you see the screen. You see probably a couple hundred cars there. And what I really, really like about it is once you get to the top third of the frame, it just turns into Mad Max, where you can see trails of dust kicked up by all these other cars and off-roading machines that are just going incredibly fast through this super, super loose sand. So much so that, I mean, you can barely even make out that there's a massive mountain in the top right because there's just that much dust in the air that these people are kicking up. So, I mean, yeah, I think this photo has so much good going for it because the gentleman in the Jeep, that's the subject of the photo, you can really trace the I guess, leading lines back down. Like, you can follow where his path actually was. You can see the crowds of people, how massive it is, and you can see why it's such a hazy photo through all of the people just driving through the desert. I just think it has so many elements that can adequately tell the story of King of the Hammers in one frame. If I may, real quick, one thing on the note of like digital manipulation, I know a lot of other photographers would probably get rid of that stanchion delineator cone on the right of frame, and the bottom left you see that little just the top of it, the orange circle. A lot of photographers would do that, and I think this would be the most innocuous way to do that. Like, they literally, nobody would miss having that element in your photo, but that just shows like this is the kind of photographer I am. You could get rid of that and it wouldn't hurt any single thing, especially the one on the bottom left where you just see the head of it, but that's just not how I do things. But if somebody else did it, that would be totally fine, and first off, we wouldn't know, and if we did know, it wouldn't matter. 9 times out of 10, and if you are working for a big paper, I highly doubt that the Associated Press, Getty, or any of them would care if you got rid of something so inconsequential. So this is when I was doing sports photography. We were shooting, I'm shooting Zeke Naji here, who, if I remember correctly, now plays for the Denver Nuggets. He was a freshman at the time, and this kid was a monster. I mean, looking up at him, it's already like, Jesus Christ, this dude's huge. And the level of emotion. I mean, the thing that I really love about it is the fact that he is obviously the subject of the photo, but just right of him, I've inadvertently taken a second photo of him on the Jumbotron. So you can see his emotion, his strength, and his power through the proximity of the photo next to me. And I love how he's mostly backlit. Obviously, there's a lot of light that's catching him on our side, but I'm looking into the rafters where most of the lights are. So, I mean, there's just so much, like you said, dynamic. I mean, you can see so many lines. The light is just really contouring all the muscles of his body. It's making for such an interesting frame up top. And then, yeah, when you look at the Jumbotron, you can see, like, nah, this man is screaming his ass off in excitement because he just slammed a massive dunk on whoever we were playing that day. So, yeah, no, this is one of those ones that I looked at the back of my camera as I took and I was like, Griffin, you ain't bad at this. You're all right.
Something that's quite Marmite in photography are lens flares. Do you like them, hate them? What's your thoughts?
I don't really have much of an opinion either way. I would say I'm 100% apathetic to them. I mean, there's just always going to be some quirks about how everything in the world works. And I mean, if you stop your lens down, you're going to start getting cat's eyes or potentially like sun stars if you have it angled the right way. I just think it's a byproduct of how things work. Obviously, it's not how our eyes see things as much unless you have astigmatism. But yeah, I mean, it can work. I think Michael Bay can be a little bit excessive with his use of them, but sometimes it's pretty gnarly. Yes, this one is of obviously gymnastics. The girl on the left, her name is Malia Hargrove, and the one on the right, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, and I'm going to look it up because I feel terrible about it. But anyways, the reason that I love this photo is because Malia is the one who's doing the floor routine here, and I mean, she was fantastic. I think she was a freshman at the time, but she was really good, and she's doing her thing, and you can see the reason I like this is another one that kind of tells the story where you see her teammate there whose name is, I'm pulling up, I'm close. Of course it didn't come up. I'm embarrassed. I basically like this one because it shows Christina Berg. That's who that is. Right? Yeah, Christina Berg. That's correct. Cool. Thank God. Whew. Let's cut that so it looks like I got her name right the first time. But yeah, no, I just like it because I feel like this also tells the story where, yeah, Malia's the one who's doing the dance, but you can see her teammate cheering her on, not through clapping, but like she knows her routine so much. She knows the beats that she doesn't even have to look at Malia because she's watched it so many times that she's memorized it. So she's saluting at the same time from the sidelines as Malia is actually in her routine. And I just feel like that shows the bond of these kinds of gymnastic athletes, maybe, that they just know each other and their sport and their dance so well that they're able to just subconsciously be like, and this is the point that she does the salute, and then she's going to do a triple backflip and blah, blah, blah. Plus, I sometimes find it interesting not focusing on what you should. I mean, it's another way of taking the photo that other people wouldn't. Obviously, I got a lot of other photos of Malia doing her routine because it was like a 3-minute dance, but every once in a while it's like, no, what are the other people doing during this frame? And I think that this photo of Christina Berg, whose name I know, I think that this shows that really well. Yeah, this is on the drone. This was taken on my Mavic 3 shortly after I got it, and yeah, I really enjoy this one because first off, no horizon, but I just like this one because you see the beautiful massive scale of the ocean. You see all the people on the beach, and there's so much color and life happening on Santa Monica's pier itself. I mean, I don't think that there's anything about this photo that makes it that like you can ogle on and on about the technique as much as it's just like, no, this is just like a good photo that really adequately conveys a moment in time and a feeling. Because I mean, you can show this photo to anybody and you can immediately hear the rickety clacking of the roller coaster going down and think about what the weather is like and how you feel in the water on the beach. Like this is almost like a memory photo is how I would describe it. Yeah, and if I flew maybe 50 feet, that would be west, so towards the pier, I would be in a no-fly zone because there is the Santa Monica airport and a bunch of helicopter activity. So I had a hard deck on the ceiling there. Yeah, so number 0, that's Josh Green. He currently plays for the Mavericks, if I remember correctly. And one of my friends was just telling me that he's doing pretty well, which, side note, I don't keep up with sports at all, minus motorsports. That year that 2 years I was doing sports photography, I knew it like the back of my hand, and nobody could tell me anything about our teams because I was the one there and talking to the players every day for years straight. But as soon as I graduated, I was like, I don't care about this stuff. I was just good at photographing it. Yeah, so this is of Josh Green. I just like the levels to this photo. Josh Green is clearly the subject. You see his action. He's passing the ball. You see the strain of their number 3, Tilly. The attention that Petrusev, or however you pronounce that, is paying towards it. And you see Zeke is just ready for it. I mean, it's just everyone's eyes are on the ball. And you see where the action's going, who it's going to. It's just so many layers in the frame that, wow, this isn't a unique story. It's like, oh, man passes ball to friend. I just like how it conveyed the energy of that night and the fact that Josh is in the air. Like, he's jumping to make this pass, and he's double-teamed. Like, he is in a bad spot and needs to get that ball out of there. So, yeah, it's the layers and the way everyone's eye is already drawn to the basketball, I think, is what can make it pretty cool in this one. If I'm not mistaken, there's no fence in this photo. Yeah, it is so heavily blurry, it's hard to tell. But yeah, this is that panning technique, and because I shot it with, I think, what was my focal length at? Focal length was at 16 millimeters, so I'm literally as wide as I can go on my widest lens. When you're able to shoot that wide and you're doing that panning, you're going to see so much more of that landscape move, so it conveys the speed even better than you would with a telephoto. And yeah, I mean, this is another one that's pretty well timed, where the car is like so perfectly framed. Dead center. I mean, I don't even think I cropped this, if I remember correctly. Like, it was just perfectly in the center, tack sharp, and everything else is such a blurry mess. It's like, no, this guy is just tearing through it. I think he's probably about to go into turn 5, if I remember correctly, right before the fountain at the Long Beach Grand Prix. Yeah, I mean, I just think this is an interesting, different way to shoot that same technique with the super wide angle. Because, yeah, again, it's just when you do it with the wide angle, you see so much more of the world moving, because this is so much blurrier than literally every other photo that I showed you using those same techniques. And that's due to the wide angle as opposed to the telephoto. Yeah, this one, yeah, significantly tighter. This is with the 70-200. I believe I cropped it in on this one to shoot at the APS-C equivalent, which would have put it at roughly 300 millimeters. At most 300 millimeters. And this one, the only reason I really want to talk about it, like, I do really enjoy this one a lot, but you can see that there's a man here and that there's a fence there. And what I like about it is, I mean, there's already, whether you're just using a telescope or a telephoto lens, like say if this is just a normal photo or you're just viewing through it, with those types of telescopic optics, anything with that longer focal range, you're always going to have the distracting elements like a fence bleed away. It's just going to burn out and you're not going to see much of the fence once you're really zoomed in through it. Those details kind of just melt and you're able to see through a fence. So it's combining this with the pan is why this man who's standing there, I mean, it doesn't even look like he has legs. You can see through much of his torso and the fence is gone. So while I think that this is an interesting photo that I really enjoy, I just in particular like it because, I mean, I would talk to a lot of kids who are nowhere near as experienced as me with photography that I met at this weekend. They're just sitting there thinking, I don't know how to take a photo in this situation. I'm like, no, literally do this. And I turned their shutter speed down. I zoomed it in for them. And I was like, now just follow the car. And they were able to get photos that looked similar to this for the reasons I just said. All of those details that would normally block the view start to melt away a lot more. And that's why we're able to get a pretty intelligible photo of this car. This one I love. So this is Chocolate Thunder again. This is the same trail, the exact same path that the ones that night photo was on. This is the exact same path, just during the day. I think this is actually during competition, so I think that's a competitor as opposed to a spectator who's climbing up. Yeah, his license plate T824 it makes me inclined to believe that. But I like this one because while it is still a motorsports photo that is showing this guy competing, it's as much a landscape photo. And again, you get the leading lines that lead you completely from the bottom right to the top left, where he'll eventually crest the mountain. You can see the precarious terrain. Yeah, he's taking the dirt as opposed to the boulders, but I mean, some people would take the boulders instead if it was clogged up. And yeah, the lighting adds to the texture as well, because if everything was just universally lit here, it wouldn't look like much. But with the sun being low to the right, you're able to see just all the shadows cast and see the depth and the protrusions of all the different rocks here. So yeah, this is when I was still very deep into my architecture craze. And yeah, I was in New York visiting my then girlfriend, and yeah, we were at Smorgasburg, which is like a food flea market kind of thing in the Williamsburg neighborhood of Bed-Stuy, if I remember correctly. I've only been to New York once, so I don't remember my boroughs that well. But yeah, no. So I mean, this market, it's on the top floor of a building in like kind of a warehouse district. And so you look out, and this was just the view that was there. And I mean, it's picturesque. I mean, if we want to artistically interpret it more, you can see, I said interpret. If you want to artistically interpret it more, you can talk about how much building there is on our side of the river as there is on the opposite, and make a commentary about it being the never, excuse me, the ever-enduring concrete jungle that you can't escape from. There's probably some kind of commentary about that, but I'm not going to make it. I just think that this is a pretty photo that I did some nice editing with. I think I took that on my Fujifilm. X Pro 2 is what I had at the time. And I used one of their memory color settings. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to keep these highlights and shadows pretty well. This is probably like perfectly on the S curve in terms of its edit. All the ones that are in this folder are from my Yosemite trip. And I took what I would believe to be probably some of my most beautiful photos ever on that trip, at least in terms of landscape, but kind of just period. And I just fell in love with it. And I realized almost immediately there that I wanted to put all of these in black and white. And I don't know if that's me wanting to be some like faux intellectual Ansel Adams artist or what. I know overwhelmingly a big reason I wanted to do that is because the scenes have so much contrast because we're doing basically everything midday. And contrast really benefits from, like, in extreme contrast, black and white is typically the best way to do it. Because if it was, although I do have a color version of this photo, which is still pretty good, I'm not going to lie, I think that the black and white just really benefits in this one. I like it because, you could see the light perfectly. First off, this is one that I actually took towards the top of one of my climbs. It was like a 200-foot climb, if I'm not mistaken. Had the cameras on my back. And once I reached the top anchor, I had my buddy take on the rope. And I just unclipped I think this was taken on the 7200. And I was looking around for a second, and I really was pointing it around and just trying to see what I saw. And I turned around, and I saw this view, because it was later afternoon. Yeah, this was taken at 4:30. Oh, no, this was 24 millimeters. So that was on my 24 to 70. But yeah, I mean, the sun was low because it was in the afternoon, so you were able to really catch a nice shadow that hit only the top. And yeah, one of the reasons I love it is because not only is it beautiful seeing the river course through the bottom and seeing the way the light's hitting the top left of that mountain, but I mean, if you are looking at it on like a really good screen or on prints, which I'm planning on doing some print work finally to some degree, you can zoom in and really see like no, it's not just black underneath that mountain. You can see like the individual leaves of the trees there. Like there's endless detail even in the absolutely crushed darkness of the shadows, and I love it. Yeah, it's just, there's just so much in it. Yeah, that's all I could say. There's just so much. This is actually one of the last photos I took on the trip. We were heading out of Yosemite, and we were leaving way later than we wanted to already. It was such a long trip. We were only there for 2 nights. Some people were there for 3 days, but we left late on Friday. So, I mean, while we weren't there long in terms of time, since we were just rock climbing and just working out all day and not eating enough to supplement it, like, we were exhausted. And it was like a 6-hour drive home. But, yeah, so, like, once we were, like, finally packed up, we're like, all right, let's just get out of here. Like, it's already way too late in the day. And we're driving along, and I look over to my left, and I see that, and I'm like, shit! So I slam on the brakes, and we get out of the car, and we look at that. Because, yeah, I mean, first off, all of this weekend was incredible, where the other 2 photos that I sent were waterfall ones. Waterfalls obviously exist at Yosemite, but this weekend was kind of a perfect storm in terms of beautiful circumstances, because there's been so much rain in California this year, starting last year into the beginning of this year, that the rivers were already ridiculously high, but at the top of it, it's all snow-capped, that it's just constantly melting. So you have just so much water flowing through. And I bring this up to say that realistically, there probably wouldn't have been any water there if we went literally any other year in the last like 100 years. But that water there gave us just enough of the reflection that I could see that tree that's in the center frame just perfectly kind of bouncing ever so slightly in its reflection. And because this was taken in late afternoon, which, why can't I see when it was taken? Yeah, this was taken at 4:05. because it was taken in later afternoon. It's almost sunset conditions, so the light is getting soft. It's not quite golden hour gold yet, but which I don't like shooting at golden hour that much as is, but it's enough that it's hitting it beautifully, but still giving a pretty natural look. Just, yeah, it's perfectly lit. I mean, this is like a postcard photo, is all I can say about it. It's just too perfect.
That's a really brilliant portfolio that you've got. So that just about wraps everything up. Is there anything that you'd like to plug at all? Any websites or social media, anything like that?
Yeah. So my website, that would be darkcrustacean.com. And if you're a normal person who doesn't know how to spell crustacean, that is crust, like pizza crust. CRUSTACEAN. So darkcrustacean.com. My Instagram is darkcrustacean as well. And if you're curious why the hell I chose that name to brand myself, it's something dumb I thought of in high school that just stuck with me. And now I get jobs from people all the time. And I ask the producers, hey, how'd you find me? And they're like, well, we were searching hashtags and geolocations, and we saw a very stupid name. So we clicked and saw what it was. They don't necessarily say stupid, but they saw the unique name, and they figured they'd see what it was, and they saw a large breadth of actually good work. So, I don't know. Choose a good brand name, no matter how stupid it is. Having something unique matters, as opposed to just saying Griffin Riley photo. Yeah.